Hey, welcome to another Facebook Live. I'm Kelley McKenzie, the Longarm Specialist for Janome, America. Today I'm going to tackle a topic that's on Pro-Stitcher Lite. So this will be for everyone that has a QM15, a QM18, and they have the Pro-Stitcher Lite software on it. What I'm going to do is try to resolve the confusion there is between what frame space is and what area is, and why we use it, okay? Because with Pro-Stitcher Lite, you have to have a frame space set or you can't stitch out a quilt, okay? So let's talk about what frame space is. What frame space is the distance your machine can travel as far up here to the left as it can travel as far down here to the right, okay? Now, if you're doing a small quilt like I am, you don't have to go, when you set your frame space, way over here and way down there. You can just go a few inches outside of your quilt and let this be the start point of your frame space. So, to set a frame space, you first move your machine to the first point of where you want that to be at, and you go to the area tab on the screen and you select frame space, and you're going to hear a registration ding when I do that. Okay, so now I'm going to come and move my machine. Sorry, I have 2 layers of batting there. Way over here past my quilt top to the bottom right portion of my frame. And I'm going to select the frame space option again. Now, if I look right over here, I can see that my frame space width is 30 inches and the height is 10.37. So let's talk about that for just a second. If you have a QM15 and you're going to be quilting a large quilt, it's a good idea to make sure that the depth of your pattern is no larger than 9 inches, because as you quilt your quilt, your quilt gets rolled onto this bar right here, and as it's rolled onto this bar, the space that the distance your machine can travel forward gets smaller and smaller. Okay, right now with nothing rolled onto it, my set base is only 10.37 inches. So just keep that in mind when you are looking at designs, that it's best to keep them at 9 inches and smaller in depth, okay? So we have our frame space set. Now what I'm going to do is set my quilt area. Now my quilt area is the actual size of my quilt. So I'm going to move my needle to the top left-hand corner of my quilt, just to the outside edge. Now some people will put it on their quilt. I put it on the edge. That's just the way I like to do it. I like to have a little room for margin of error. So once I have my needle at the top left-hand corner of my quilt, I stay inside the area tab and I just select 2 corner. You heard that registration. There's a little pink dot on my screen, and now I'm going to move it over here to the bottom right corner of my screen and select 2 corner again. Okay, now if you look right over here, it tells you your area of your quilt top. Mine's 24 inches wide and it says it's only 10 inches tall. I'm going to click into that height box and actually put the actual length of my quilt, which is 36 inches. Now it has the correct size of my physical quilt. Now I'm going to hit the refresh button on my screen so that I can see not only my pink box, but my maroon box as well. So let's talk about this one more time. Our pink box is the representation of our quilt top, its size, and where it is on our frame. The frame space, the maroon box, represents the distance my machine can physically travel on my frame, okay? So anytime I'm going to quilt something, I need to make sure that it's inside that maroon box, okay? So I'm just quickly going to add a design to the screen. And I'm not gonna do it like I would if it was truly a quilt I was about to quilt. I'm going to actually make a big gap in between my rows just so it's easy for y'all to see how what I'm teaching you works. So I'm gonna zoom in real quick just to show you what I've done. You can see that I am making it where you visibly can see the distinction in between the rows. This is just for teaching purposes. If this were a real quilt top that I was going to quilt, I would close this gap in so that the gap here is the same as the gap is here, as the gap is here, as the gap is here. But I am doing this for teaching purposes only, okay? I'm going to refresh my screen now. So what we see is that that whole first row is safe to be quilted because it's inside the maroon box, okay? It does not matter about the pink box. The maroon box is what is so important, okay? So what we're going to do now is we're going to play make-believe, and we are going to pretend as if I've already quilted that entire first row, and I'm going to go and physically advance my quilt top, okay? So we've quilted the first row. There's pretty little flowers all over the top of this quilt. So what I'm going to do now is just advance this real quick. Okay. Okay. And then, of course, this is side teaching right here. Side notes, little bonus things you're getting. Of course, the next thing that I would typically do is tack the sides of my quilt up on both sides so that it doesn't flip and so that it doesn't have any shrinkage. It'll keep my quilt top the size that it is, okay? Normally I would do that. Okay, so now is the time where we seem to run into trouble. I'm going to drag and drop that first row because I've rolled it up and it's in here so that I can go and quilt that second row of quilting. So again, this is a little bit of a side lesson inside of a lesson for you. I'm going to go find a point at the bottom middle part of that quilting row that I just quilted, and I'm going to zoom in. And I'm going to select the point of this leaf right here, okay? You always, if you can, you always want to select a point, and you want it to pick it at the bottom of the pattern and somewhere in the middle of your row. That way you have less drifting from left to right on your quilt, okay? So I can even zoom in even more. See, I am pretty much dead on the point of that leaf, so I'm going to be very accurate with this. So now what I would do is I would select the drag option, and then I would move my machine to where that actual bottom of that leaf is. And let's just pretend like this is where it's at, and I'm going to select the drop feature. Okay, so now my machine is ready to quilt that second row. My machine would want to move right down here to the start point and start quilting, okay? But this is what you need to do to prevent having that error message that says crosshair or design is out of frame space. So let's look at something. I'm going to zoom into the second row, okay? And if you notice, here's the first row we quilted. Here's the second row we want to quilt. Do you see how the design is slightly still out of that maroon area? That is not good, okay? So immediately I would know I need to use the drag and drop feature again and move my pattern up a little bit more in my frame space. But let's also check one other thing. We need to see that our frame space is still accurate. So if I were to move to the top left corner, I can already see that my frame space has shrunk because this is as far to the top left as I can get my quilt. I mean, I could go a little bit further over to the left, but I can't go any further up, okay? So it's already shrunk. So I'm going to reset that frame space. This is something that you have to do throughout the quilt, okay? So I'm going to go to area, and I've already got my machine at the top left corner, so I'm going to select frame space, and then I'm going to move it as far to the bottom left and over past my quilt, and I'm going to select frame space again. Now I have a new maroon box, and if you look, my design is still not inside that frame space. So to fix that so that I can quilt that second row without getting an error message, I'm going to come back up here to the same leaf that I used on the first row. I'm going to zoom in and make sure I'm being very accurate. And I'm going to select that drag feature, and I'm going to move and advance my quilt up a little bit more and drop it in place, refresh my screen, and see if now I can quilt that whole row, and I can. Now, the one thing I didn't tell you is that, you know, I would have had to adjust the roll of my quilt. So I would have had to have turn this a little bit more to get that row that I dragged and dropped up there, okay? So again, this is how you want it to always look. Whatever you're going to quilt, you want to make sure it is in this maroon frame. If not, right now, if you have the Connect on your QM15, what is going to happen is you're going to get that error message that says design or crosshair out of frame space. and it locks your machine up and you can't move it even after you X out of the error message. So if you get that error message, what you are going to have to do is you're going to have to go to your settings icon, to advanced, to communication, and you're going to have to select reconnect motors. Now, when you do select reconnect motors, if you run into this error message, you will have to reline up your quilt and everything, because it puts a blindfold on your machine, it spins it around in the room, and then it tells it to go find where it was at, and it can't because it's blind, okay? So you will have to go and put your quilt and realign everything back up by going to reposition. Okay, now that's a lesson for another day. So here's the key. Don't screw up. Sorry. So make sure that before you start everything that you're going to quilt, that it is always inside that maroon frame space. Okay, so let's do just a quick recap. I'm sorry this live is so short, but I think shorter, quick lessons is better than long ones that I even get tired of watching them. I'm like, oh, I can't watch anymore, and I click out of it. So short ones are good. So again, we talked about frame space and our quilt area. Frame space is the maroon box that we create, and it is the furthest our machine can travel on our frame from the top left to the bottom right, okay? The frame space does have to be adjusted throughout the quilt because, again, recap, this bar grows with your quilt, and as this bar grows with your quilt machine starts to, hold on, I've got too much batting underneath this needle right here. As it starts to grow, let's just pretend like it's grown so much that this fabric is as big as my fist. My machine can't go as far up anymore, okay? Right now it can go pretty far up, but if my quilt was growing, it wouldn't be able to go as far up. Therefore, that means my frame space has to be adjusted, okay? Now, the pink box is your quilt area, it's your physical quilt, and it's representation on your frame. That doesn't have to be adjusted ever. Once you set your frame, your quilt area, it's your quilt area. Okay, you can even clear out your area if you've baselined your design so that you don't even have but just one box, okay? Just remember that when you go to quilt anything, double check and make sure that what you are physically fixing to quilt is inside your maroon box or your frame space. I hope today was very helpful. Do I have any questions? If you have any questions, put them in the comments. I'll come back and look later on today, and I will answer any questions you have. You also are always welcome to email me at kellymckenzie@Janome, then the _America.com. Thanks for joining me today, and until next time, see ya.